This is something I heard from my husband. When my husband was in his 20s, because he didn't want to be a corporate slave, he took the money he earned from part-time jobs and used it to modify a car. Then he set up a mobile coffee business at the foot of a mountain in Kyushu. The location where he sells coffee is a gravel parking lot that can accommodate several cars. Sometimes there are self-driving travelers or people riding bicycles and motorcycles who stop there to rest. That place is considered somewhat popular in the area. So, there's no sense of gloom there, and the surroundings are very nice. There are also many customers. He drives there every morning at 6 o'clock to prepare for business. Starting at 7 o'clock, there are usually some people exercising or commuters passing by. Around 11 o'clock, he takes a break until 1 o'clock and then resumes business until evening. However, shortly after he started his business, one day, he was chatting with some customers who were going to see the night view on the mountain, and they stayed later than usual. The closing time was much later than usual. At that time, late at night, he was alone, quietly tidying up and preparing for the next day. There were some street lights in the distance, but in that gravel parking lot, it was pitch black, with only the light from his car and the sound of insects nearby and the sound of the radio playing in his car. At that moment, he was tidying up at the workbench in his car, when suddenly, he heard footsteps in the distance on the gravel road. He thought, wonder who's coming over, because my husband had experienced before friends coming to see him unexpectedly when closing, so he thought it might be a friend. So he put down his work and looked out the window. But all he saw outside was pitch black. There were no signs of any cars entering the gravel parking lot or any people. He felt a bit strange, but he didn't pay much attention to it, thinking he might have misheard, so he continued working. However, as he continued to tidy up, he heard the footsteps again, approaching in his direction and getting closer than before. From the sound of it, it seemed like the footsteps of 2 or 3 people. He looked out the window and asked, "Who's there?" He didn't get a response, so he looked carefully outside, but there was still no one. Because it was a bit eerie, he also felt a chilling atmosphere, so he hastened his pace in tidying up. Just as he was halfway through tidying up, a man's voice sounded not far from the front of his car. "Excuse me, sir, do you have any sake, cola, or milk tea?" He was startled by the sudden voice, but he thought, oh, there really are people. So he relaxed slightly and cheerfully replied, "Sorry, we're closed. We're all out of drinks." After he finished speaking, he heard the footsteps gradually receding, and then the sound of footsteps suddenly disappeared in an instant. Although my husband said he had had a few inexplicable experiences when he was young, this was the first time he had such a close encounter, and the thought of doing business there in the future, possibly encountering such situations again, so he still felt a bit scared. Later, before he went home that day, he went to a nearby convenience store to buy drinks and casually asked the night shift clerk if there had been any bad incidents around there. The night shift clerk told him that when he was very young, a family of 3's bodies were found in the deep woods nearby, abandoned there by someone, and the killer was still at large. My husband continued to ask the clerk about the location, and he found out that the wooded area where the bodies were abandoned was not far from where my husband set up his stall. After learning this information, the next day, my husband bought sake, cola, and milk tea, and placed them by the roadside near the woods. And in the following years, he did business there. He never saw those three ghosts again. However, sometimes at night, when he was alone, tidying up in his car, in the parking lot when no one was around, there were still a few times he heard the footsteps of 2 or 3 people walking past his car, and whenever he heard those footsteps, he knew it was time to buy new sake, cola, and milk tea for them.